This video covers ratios and proportions. A ratio is the comparison of two numbers using division. That could look just like a fraction, like saying the ratio of 2 to 3, or it could look like 2 to 3. These are both okay ways to write ratios. Sometimes you'll see labels like 2 boys to 3 girls, but other times you won't. One thing that's really important to remember about ratios is that the order matters. A ratio of 2 to 3 is not the same as saying 3 over 2. Our first example is a word problem. It reads, a basketball team won 5 games, so we're going to outline the important information, lost 10 games, and tied 2 games. What is the ratio of wins to losses? Go ahead, pause the video, and try this yourself. The two quantities you're concerned about are wins and losses. So if they're asking for the ratio of wins to losses, remember I said the order matters, so we're going to say wins to losses or wins over losses. So if we do it in a fraction form, we say wins over losses. We know we won 5 games, so we put 5 on top, and we lost 10 games. So your answer is 5 over 10. You still want to simplify ratios just like you'd simplify fractions. So 5 over 10 becomes 1 over 2 if you divide the numerator and denominator by 5. And this would be your final answer. Because you have an order, you do not need to write units. So you have to make sure you say wins first and losses second, and you don't need units. You could also say 1 to 2. These two statements mean the same thing. Notice that in this problem you didn't use all of the information. We were also told how many ties there were, but that didn't matter for this problem, so we ignored it. Our next question asks us, what is the ratio of losses to ties? So remember, order matters, so we want to put our losses first, and we want to relate that to ties. So our losses were 10. We lost 10 games. And ties, we tied 2 games. So it's 10 to 2. This is equal to 5, but because we want it in a ratio, we don't just write 5, we would write 5 over 1. So we're saying for every 5 games lost, we win, or we tie 1 game. So for every 5 games lost, we tie 1 game. So our answer is not just 5, it's 5 over 1, or 5 to 1. Both of these are correct. A proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are equivalent. So here, in this first example, we have two ratios. The first ratio is 2 over 3, and the second ratio is 4 over 6. We know just from our basic knowledge of fractions that 2/3 equals 4/6, because if you were to multiply 2 by 2 and 3 by 2, you would get 4 over 6. Let's look at a word problem that uses proportions. Adelia is making holiday punch. The recipe calls for 30 scoops of rainbow sherbet for 12 pints of punch. So our important information is 30 scoops of sherbet for 12 pints of punch. How many scoops of sherbet are needed to make 4 pints of punch? So how many scoops for 4 pints of punch? So the first step is to make a labeled chart. I went ahead and did that step for you. So make sure you have a chart that looks like this on your paper too. So our big recipe, which is the original recipe, says 30 scoops of sherbet. So scoops of sherbet for the big one is 30 scoops for 12 pints. And now it wants to know how many scoops of sherbet, so we don't know how many scoops, so we'll give that a variable like x, are needed to make 4 pints of punch. So now that we've gone ahead and made a chart, our next step, which is step 2 over here, is to write an equation. So we can turn this into a proportion by saying 30 over 12 is equal to x over 4. All we did is create an equal sign here and turn these two parts into two equal ratios. The final step is to solve for missing quantities, and that's what we're going to learn to do on the next page. The first option for a way to solve proportions is something you've seen before. So we're trying to get m by itself, because that's how you solve an equation for a variable. And to do that, we can multiply both sides by 12. So this is our multiplication property of equality. Our 12s cancel, so we end up with just m on the right side, which is what we want. And over here we get 12 multiplied by 9 divided by 2. You could go ahead and multiply 12 times 9, which is 108, and divide it by 2. And then you get 54 equals m. Or you could take this step, and instead of multiplying this big number, you could simplify right away and say this becomes 1, this becomes 6, and now you just have 6 times 9, which is 54, which equals m. Both will get you the same answer, but this version makes the math a little simpler. Our next option for solving a proportion is cross products. So cross products are generally the easiest and fastest way to solve. However, sometimes the first option will be a little bit quicker. You'll just have to look at the problem and judge for yourself. So cross products said that if you calculate the cross products and set them equal to each other, they're the same. So we know that 2/3 is equal to 4/6 because if you multiply 2 by 2, you get 4, and 3 by 2, you get 6. So we know right away these are equal. This makes an ideal test scenario. So if we do cross products, we multiply 2 by 6. So 2 by 6 gives you 12, and 3 times 4, which is the other cross product, equals 12. So we know that if you multiply the cross products, they should be equal. That means that if we have a proportion with a variable, we can try that same method to solve a variable. So we do 2 times m, which is 2m, and set that equal to 9 times 12, which is 108. Now to solve, you divide both sides by 2, and m equals 54, which is what we got with the first option because this is the same equation. So now we know that both options work, and you can choose whichever one you'd like to use depending on the problem. Here are 2 examples for you to try on your own. Go ahead, pause the video, give these a try, and then we can check them together. The answer to the first problem is x equals 20, and the answer to the second problem is x equals -3. If you got those answers, great job. If not, make sure to go through step by step and see what you did wrong. This problem here, the second problem, is tricky because you have 2 x's in the problem. You have 1 here and 1 here. And when you're doing cross multiplication, you have to do 4 times the entire quantity, x minus 3. And you see that step right here. So follow the work carefully. Remember that at this step you have to move all the x's to one side, and you want to try to keep them positive if possible because it makes it a little bit easier to solve. And then you work your way down vertically to get the final answer.